In 1830, France invaded Algeria, easily capturing Algiers on July 5th. With a foothold, they slowly captured all of Algeria, replacing the Ottoman Beyliks on December 9, 1848, with the three departments of Oran, Alger, and Constantine. By World War I, France controlled Morocco and Tunisia as well, as North African troops served a critical role in defending France from the Germans. During the Second World War, France was crushed by Germany, forming the new Vichy regime, before Free France, led by Charles de Gaulle, employed hundreds of thousands of North Africans to fight, as the German menace was eventually obliterated. By the 1950s, as most European states began decolonizing, tensions arose in Algeria as the French had no plans of leaving and attempted to enforce their rule through harsh force, despite the heavy tax burden the departments cost. France bitterly fought the FLN, Front de Libération Nationale, an Algerian terrorist organization beginning in 1954, on Toussaint Rouge, Bloody All Saints' Day, as the FLN killed 10 people and made 70 attacks. For the next 8 years, the French, who had more military support through the native Harkis than the FLN, committed a brutal war, before de Gaulle grew tired of the conflict and recognized Algerian independence in 1962. Over a million Pieds Noirs, European settlers, fled back to France, turning their backs on the important Harki allies who were systematically executed by the new Algerian state, which implemented parts of Sharia law and imposed oppressive laws on women. But don't get down, you were 42,000 Français, and the 90% who haven't subscribed yet. History is forever changed in 1942 during the Second World War, as General Giroux is killed by German guards while escaping prison, leaving America with no other French general to negotiate with in North Africa besides Admiral François Darlan. As a senior French figure, Eisenhower needed his backing to simplify the North African campaign, as French aid would secure Operation Torch, effectively ending the African front for the Axis. On November 6th, pro-Allied French forces seized parts of Algiers, opening the door for American forces to occupy the city. So Robert Murphy, the American consul in Algeria, met French General Alphonse Juin, saying, "We hope for your cooperation, General, and the cooperation of the French forces here against a common enemy." Murphy told the French general, "German troops occupy the greater part of France. Only through our victory can France be free." Juin supported Murphy, who then urged Darlan to, quote, "seize this golden opportunity." Instead of sticking with his oath of loyalty to Pétain, the Vichy leader, Darlan recognized a chance to shape the course of French history, backing the Americans after learning of their troops closing in on the city. The 12,000 French garrison and the 30,000 reserves were ordered to allow the Allies into the city, as 2 British destroyers docked. A radio announcement quickly followed, as Darlan declared command over all French forces in North Africa, urging the populace to support the Americans, forming his own French government, known as French Liberation, in tandem with America, different from de Gaulle's British-aligned Free France. Once Darlan's proclamation circulated in the West, the media immediately changed their tunes, as they did with many other American-backed quasi-dictators while it was still convenient for the states. Instead of being portrayed as a dictatorial kleptocrat, Darlan had infiltrated the highest ranks of the evil Vichy regime, discovering their secret weaknesses. His loyalty to the Allies was indisputable from the beginning, as he had kept the French Navy out of German hands, while he secretly supported French partisans fighting on the front lines in the moral crusade between democracy and totalitarianism. This was, of course, almost entirely false, but served as important propaganda throughout the war. For America, Admiral Darlan, not de Gaulle, was the French beacon for liberty, equality, and fraternity as opposed to Vichy collaboration. Although the Vichy and Liberation regimes were now separate, Darlan communicated with the Vichy Secretary of the Navy, Admiral Gabriel Enfant, to flee to North Africa. Enfant then met with Admirals Jean de Laborde and André Marquis, where they set sail for Algiers at once, as the three were promised high-ranking government positions once the war was over. When Germany heard of the Darlan proclamation, the Führer ordered Operation Anton, as German and Italian forces moved to Toulon to seize the French Navy, one of the globe's strongest, and give it to Italy. By the time the Axis forces arrived, the remaining Vichy Navy was across the Mediterranean, joining Darlan, considerably strengthening the French liberation. With Darlan firmly on the Allied side, his security increased, so the anti-Vichyist and monarchist Fernand Bonnier de la Chapelle's assassination attempt was foiled in December 1942. By the end of the year, Morocco and Algeria were fully liberated, while Tunisia held out. In January of 1943, the Casablanca Conference took place, as Darlan met with FDR, Churchill, and de Gaulle, where the Sicily Campaign was formulated, while the Axis unconditional surrender was agreed upon. By May 14th, Tunisia was free from Axis troops. On June 3rd, Darlan became the co-president of the French Committee of National Liberation with de Gaulle, challenging the legitimacy of Vichy, supposedly unifying the forces of Free France with French liberation against Germany and their collaborators, which later evolved into the French Provisional Government. The alliance with Free France was tenuous at best, as many under Darlan were high-ranking members of the Vichy government and former collaborators, But for America, Darlan filled the standard ambitious pro-Yankee strongman archetype that they often backed, similar to Syngman Rhee in Korea or Chiang Kai-shek in China. Americans have always liked the idea of dealing with a foreign leader who can be identified as their man. They are much less comfortable with movements. As Giroux was dead, Darlan's ruthless nature filled the role perfectly, disrupting de Gaulle's movement that many Americans distrusted. Disagreements between the two reached a breaking point. One would have to step aside, and as British subservience towards America became apparent, Darlan forced de Gaulle to resign from the French National Liberation Force in 1944. America got their man, while Darlan got the remains of the French Empire. Later in 1944, de Gaulle's flight across the Mediterranean crashed, killing the general, and many suspected foul play from Darlan, though no evidence could link him or French liberation to de Gaulle's death. The rest of the war played out similarly, as French forces landed in Occitania in August 1944, pushing north, while D-Day had already opened the front at Normandy. As part of Operation Dragoon, Darlan secretly instructed part of the French military to seize Monaco, integrating it into France without any backlash. On February 4th, 1945, FDR, Churchill, Stalin, and Darlan, elevated as a fourth important Allied member because of his general acquiescence to American counsel, met for the Yalta Conference. The four shaped post-war Europe, supposedly based upon self-determination. Berlin eventually fell as Americans surrendered on May 8, 1945, ending the European theater. The same Big Four met during the Potsdam Agreement, where Europe ended up nearly identically, though the Saar was given to France as America was more partial towards them. U.S. Secretary of State James F. Burns said this in his speech of hope. The United States does not feel that it can deny to France, which has been invaded 3 times by Germany in 70 years, its claim to the Saar territory, whose economy has long been closely linked with France. Under Darlan's leadership, the Fourth French Republic was established, while Darlan ruled like many pre-war strongmen that oversaw democratic regimes like Pilsudski or Horthy. Many Vichy policies were rolled into the new state, as many collaborators were not executed or tried. Instead, their crimes were ignored or erased as France took the Japanese approach, refusing to teach of their wrongdoings throughout the conflict. They'd always been the moral, virtuous forces, not evil in any aspect on the conflict. Blame was instead thrown upon a few select Vichy politicians said to be responsible for any of the wrongdoings, somehow absolving all of France. Pierre Laval, the Vichy Prime Minister of France from April 1942 until August 1944, was chief among the guilty politicians, of supposedly misinforming the public and the Vichy military, Darlan's strongest base of support, who were all acquitted, while many of the Vichy politicians were executed for treason. Similar to Franco's Phalangist Spain, France was extremely anti-communist and authoritarian, with an autarkic, protectionist economic policy, preserving French industrial capabilities. Arrests of communist and left-wing dissidents occurred at a gradual pace to hide the political regime from the international community. The major difference between Darlan and Franco or Salazar was the state's secularization and atheism, as all faiths were suppressed from public life for sowing disunity. Former Vichy collaborationist parties were rebranded and continued under the new regime with milder messages, phasing out anti-Semitic beliefs as Darlan became a major proponent of Jews in Algeria, as they helped weaken the Muslim presence. He completely flipped from his Vichy stance of barring Jews from important offices and stripping their citizenship to granting them special rights in Algeria to encourage settlements through tax benefits and cheap land. France served as a founding member of NATO in 1949, and developed their own nuclear program independent of America. Shortly after World War II, the Indochina War broke out, and France was still defeated by the Vietnamese, setting up a future conflict between the Communist North backed by China and the Democratic South backed by America. As the French retracted, Morocco and Tunisia were released in 1956, while almost all the Europeans and native Jews from the colonies moved to Algeria, adding another 850,000 to the 1.1 million Pieds Noirs compared to the 9 million Muslims already there. Amidst the new settlement, the Algerian War had been raging since 1954, when the FLN killed many French during the Toussaint Rouge. To many Muslims, the foreign secularization was repulsive and similar to the Soviet Union's actions all throughout Eastern Europe. Although Darlan had no intentions of Christianizing Algeria, his objective was the elimination of any Islamic political presence. Since Toussaint Rouge, Darlan branded any opponent of Algérie Française as traitorous as German collaborators, arresting and silencing French voices who favored Algerian independence. As Darlan was America's man, Raoul Salon, commander-in-chief in French Algeria, had international leeway. Salon enacted a scorched earth campaign through the military and La Main Rouge, the French counter-terrorist organization. FLN leaders were hunted down and executed, as many of their supporters were killed while many human rights were disregarded to defeat the enemy. The diminutive numbers of the Algerian combatants, only around 50,000, paled in comparison to the 210,000 Harkis, and as the war progressed in France's favor, the Harki ranks grew while more Mujahideen died. In 1957, Darlan passed away, succeeded by his understudy during the Second World War, Alphonse Juin, a marshal of France who was very popular with the military. Juin was absolutely opposed to losing the French presence in Africa, so doubled down on the war. Eventually, all the rebel leaders were killed as their movement was exterminated from public life, forced deep underground by 1964. L'Algérie Française est sécurisée. Similar to Israeli-Palestinian conflicts, the initial war was brutal and saw harsh repression of those who refused to adapt to French rule. Terrorist attacks remained a constant, but slowly faded out as Algeria secularized and modernized. Although triumphant, France recognized the need for Algerian integration to prevent another large-scale rebellion. Harkis and their families were the first to receive French citizenship as a repayment for their loyalty during the war. Earlier plans, pragmatically granting gradual citizenship, were instituted in 10-year periods at 20% populations. The secularized Algerians were always the first to be granted full rights, which dramatically maimed Islam, as many abandoned their faith in favor of full French citizenship. France never officially discriminated against Islam, but their processes for citizenship increasingly secularized the state. Juin resigned following his heart attack in 1966, but the French colonial empire did not falter. The authoritative victory over Algeria and the lack of an identity among many African colonies aided France. While Portugal was fighting to preserve their colonies, the French ones remained mostly peaceful, but everyone knew the current system was untenable, so in 1968, France held referendums to determine their future. Each colonial territory within the West and Equatorial African federations voted whether to join France or stay part of their federation, which would become transformed into French dominions with greater autonomy, akin to the early relationship between Australia and Great Britain, or to become a direct French department. Senegal and Djibouti were the only colonies that voted to become departments, as West Africa, Equatorial Africa, Cameroon, and Madagascar became semi-independent dominions of France under France-Afrique, while the Neo-French Empire became known as Union Française. Each member of the Union had independent armies, economies, and domestic policies, with complete self-governance, but the French president remained their symbolic head of states, though each dominion had its own internal elections for all of their politicians. France kept military bases throughout the dominions, and the federal armies worked with French forces, while French companies retained lucrative resource rights. Most high-ranking officers studied in France before taking outposts at home. The main unifying force was the Union's polity of laïcité, the complete separation of church from state, as the people were shielded from any religious influences. Any signs of theological disputes boiling into physical violence were eradicated by the government, as Union Française weakened Islamic and Christian proselytization efforts. While the laws didn't favor Catholics, it was arguably interpreted harsher against Islam, banning calls to prayer in traditional Islamic dress. Laic Muslims, those who privately practiced and assimilated to French life and secularized, became the norm, leaving Union Française extremely atheistic. Despite the empire's survival, the military regime peacefully made way under gradual liberalizations, as Metropolitan France no longer saw the need for wartime leadership. Although the military and government distance, France had an American-esque financial backing for their armed forces, far surpassing everyone else in Europe. The sheer number of natural resources from the colony and the general lack of religious tensions from the Union's enforcement of laïcité left France in a dominant position over all of the West save America. Union Française was roughly 3.6 million square miles compared to America's 3.8 million square miles. As they harnessed nuclear energy and the vast oil reserves of Algeria and Gabon, they held a huge trade advantage over the rest of Europe, exacerbated by the lack of the EU, as France never formed it. Much of their wealth came from the lucrative gas and oil trade with Europe, surpassing Russia as the chief supplier. Without the EU, Europe was far more decentralized and suspicious of one another, while France was more autarkic. Without the EU, Europe was far more decentralized and suspicious of one another, while France was more autarkic, as its principal trade partners were its own dominions. Increased self-reliance prevented deindustrialization as more money poured into the dominions as they attracted businesses through a more laissez-faire system, spurring industry. This left France more dominant but slightly poorer, while Europe generally lagged behind America, though the French territories meant their economic potential far surpassed current France. Europe had its diminutive post-war population growth, followed by a failure to reproduce, leading to worker shortages, but France never needed to import migrants. Union Française gave Metropolitan France a virtually unlimited supply of workers who were already well-versed in the secular and modern French culture. By the 1990s, the entire Union Française had universal suffrage as Sharia law was completely phased out, replaced by the French Napoleonic-based code. In that time, Union Française forces took responsibility for its many faults and dramatically reshaped Africa, permanently eradicating many of the worst practices: child marriages, corruption, religious discrimination, instability, ethnic violence, unemployment, unsustainable agricultural practices, human trafficking, and most importantly, slavery. These crucial actions, paired with the heavy French investments, led to higher population growth. France was far more multi-ethnic as everyone gained voting rights, but Metropolitan France remained culturally purely French, with almost no Arabic or African influence, as France only accepted migrants who quickly assimilated. Despite the more uniform society, ethnic diversity increased as French economic dominance led to large diasporas forming in major trade cities like Marseille, Lyon, Toulouse, Lille, and Paris. This led to a paradoxical situation where Algeria, Djibouti, and Senegal opposed increased migration or expanding departments in dominions as would weaken their own standing, while France proper was more open to migration, as the Département de Outre-mer and the totality of the Union Française were transforming into first world states akin to Meiji Japan. Millions of Africans elected to remain as there were fewer economic incentives and political persecution was non-existent, allowing Africa to retain its brightest and best. Once communism collapsed, France was the last major remaining superpower besides the United States, and they were in a perfect position to dominate Europe in the 21st century. They controlled more lands, had more resources, people, soldiers, and an economy to rival their eternal foe in Germany. But it was built on the complicated backs of colonization and exploitation, and underneath the camaraderie, racial tensions were still prevalent, and an economic collapse could be enough to topple the new French Empire. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to stay tuned for future videos, and click here to see what would have happened if France defeated Prussia in the Franco-Prussian War. I'll catch you over there. Thanks.